He denied his mother because she wore a dirty cloth to his graduation. The day Daniel had been waiting for had finally arrived. The bright morning sun cast a warm glow over the campus, and the university was buzzing with excitement. Graduation day was not just a milestone. It was a symbol of success, hard work, and the promise of a brighter future. For Daniel, it represented more than just a degree. It was his ticket out of a life of poverty, out of the small, rundown village where he had grown up. Daniel was proud of himself, and rightfully so. He had spent years juggling part-time jobs, scholarships, and sleepless nights to earn his degree in finance from one of the most prestigious universities in the country. His classmates came from wealthy families, their lives filled with luxury and ease. But Daniel had carved his own path through grit and determination, supported every step of the way by his mother, Mary. Mary was a woman of simple means. She had raised Daniel on her own after his father left when he was just a baby. Life had never been easy for her, but she worked tirelessly, cleaning houses, doing laundry, and working in the fields to ensure that Daniel could get an education. She often went without so that he could have what he needed. It had been her dream to see him walk across the stage and receive his diploma, the first in their family to ever do so. Despite her sacrifices, Mary had never once complained. Her love for Daniel was unconditional, and her pride in him knew no bounds. She had watched him grow from a curious boy into a determined young man, and today, her heart swelled with joy knowing that he had made it this far. But as Daniel stood in front of the mirror in his crisp graduation robe, adjusting his cap with meticulous care, a knot of anxiety twisted in his stomach. Today wasn't just about his achievement. It was about appearances. His classmates' families would be there in their tailored suits and designer dresses. They would stand beside their children, looking every bit the part of successful, accomplished families. Daniel had invited his mother, of course. How could he not? She was the reason he had made it this far. Yet, deep down, he feared what others might think when they saw her. His mind raced with images of her worn-out clothes, her weathered hands, and the humble way she carried herself. What if they judged her? What if they judged him for where he came from? For years, Daniel had navigated the social complexities of university life with a quiet confidence. He excelled academically, but there was always an undercurrent of insecurity. He didn't come from wealth, and it showed. While his classmates talked about their vacations in Europe or their summers spent at internships with prestigious firms, Daniel worked in the university library and delivered food at night just to make ends meet. He was proud of his hard work, but he also longed to fit in. Graduation was his chance to finally do that. He had landed a job with a top financial firm, and soon, he would be living in a sleek apartment in the city, far removed from the struggles of his upbringing. This day marked the beginning of his new life, one that he had fought so hard to achieve. But with that achievement came pressure to present himself as someone worthy of his new position, someone who had left the struggles of poverty behind. He knew his friends and professors would be there, and the image of his mother standing beside him in her old, worn dress filled him with dread. It wasn't that he was ashamed of her, at least that's what he told himself. He loved her more than anything, but the fear of judgment loomed large in his mind. He had worked so hard to escape the stigma of poverty, and now, on the day that was supposed to solidify his success, he felt that it could all come crashing down because of something as simple as the clothes his mother wore. Meanwhile, in the small apartment they shared just outside the city, Mary was buzzing with excitement. She had been counting down the days until Daniel's graduation, and now that it was finally here, she could hardly contain her joy. She had never been to a university campus, let alone a graduation ceremony. The thought of seeing her son walk across that stage, diploma in hand, filled her with a pride she couldn't put into words. Mary had spent the past few days preparing as best as she could. She had saved up a little extra money from her cleaning jobs and had bought herself a new pair of shoes. Well, new to her. They were secondhand, but they were in good condition, and she had polished them until they shone. Her dress, however, was another matter. It was the nicest one she owned, a modest floral print that she had worn on special occasions for years. It was clean, but no matter how many times she had washed it, the fabric remained faded, and a small tear near the hem had been mended so many times that it was barely holding together. She had considered buying something new, but the money just wasn't there. She had already spent what little she had on the shoes, and Daniel's education had always come first. So, she decided to wear the dress. It wasn't perfect, but it was presentable, and more than anything, it reminded her of all the years she had spent working to support her son. The day had finally arrived, and the campus was filled with graduates and their families, all dressed in their finest clothes. Daniel stood with his classmates, waiting for the ceremony to begin. His nerves were on edge, and he kept glancing toward the entrance, wondering when his mother would arrive. When she finally did, his heart sank. There she was, standing near the entrance, wearing the dress he had hoped she wouldn't. The fabric, though clean, was unmistakably worn, and the shoes, while polished, looked out of place among the designer heels and loafers of the other parents. His mother stood tall, her face glowing with pride, but all Daniel could see was how different she looked from everyone else. His classmates were gathered nearby, chatting with their families. He overheard snippets of conversation, parents discussing their children's job offers, congratulating one another on their successes. Daniel's mind raced. What would they think when they saw her? Would they pity him? Would they see him as less capable because of where he came from? As his mother waved and began walking toward him, Daniel felt a wave of panic. He wasn't ready. He couldn't face the judgment, the whispers, the looks of condescension. Before she could reach him, he turned his back and hurried off to join a group of classmates, pretending not to notice her. Mary spotted her son almost immediately, her face lighting up with pride. She waved, calling out his name, but he didn't respond. At first, she thought he hadn't seen her, so she moved closer, weaving her way through the crowd. "Daniel! Daniel, over here!" she called again, her voice full of excitement. This time, Daniel turned, but when their eyes met, he quickly looked away. Mary's heart skipped a beat. She watched as he whispered something to one of his friends and then walked off, leaving her standing there, confused and alone. For a moment, she stood frozen, unsure of what to do. She glanced around at the other families, all gathered in groups, laughing and taking pictures. Her eyes searched for Daniel again, but he was already lost in the crowd. Mary's heart sank, but she refused to believe that he had ignored her on purpose. Maybe he was just nervous, overwhelmed by the day. She would give him some space, she thought. She could wait until after the ceremony to congratulate him. But as the day went on, it became painfully clear that Daniel was avoiding her. When it was time for the group photo with the graduates and their families, she tried to stand next to him, but he stepped aside, making room for someone else. Mary felt a pang of hurt as she watched Daniel deliberately distance himself from her. She had been looking forward to this day for so long, dreaming of the moment she could stand proudly by his side. But now that dream seemed to be slipping away. As the photographer directed everyone to smile, Mary lingered on the edge of the crowd, unsure of where to stand. She didn't want to force herself into the picture if Daniel didn't want her there. Her heart ached with a sadness she hadn't expected on a day that was supposed to be filled with joy. After the photo was taken, the crowd dispersed, and Daniel quickly moved to another group of friends. Mary tried to approach him one more time, hoping to congratulate him in person, but every time she got close, he found a way to slip away. Eventually, she gave up. Standing on the outskirts of the celebrations, Mary felt out of place, like an unwanted guest at her own son's party. She noticed the stares from other parents, their eyes briefly resting on her faded dress before moving on, as if she didn't belong. The joy that had filled her heart that morning was now replaced with a deep sense of loneliness. Mary had always known that Daniel was destined for greater things. She had encouraged him to dream big, to reach for the stars, even if it meant leaving behind the life they had known. But she never imagined that he would leave her behind too. Without saying a word, Mary quietly slipped away from the festivities. She didn't want to embarrass Daniel any further or cause him any more discomfort. She could sense that he was ashamed of her, even if he didn't say it outright. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but Mary had always been strong, and she knew she would find a way to move past it. She took one last look at the joyous scene before turning and walking away, her footsteps slow and heavy. The walk back to their small apartment seemed longer than usual, and with each step, the weight of the day's events pressed down on her heart. As the day progressed and the ceremony came to an end, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in his chest. He had gone through the motions, accepting congratulations from friends and professors, but something was missing. He had expected to feel triumphant, elated even, but instead he felt hollow. He looked around at his classmates, laughing and celebrating with their families. Fathers and mothers beamed with pride, hugging their children tightly, taking countless pictures to capture the moment. Daniel realized with a sinking feeling that he had denied himself that very experience, the one he had worked so hard for. The memory of his mother's face, the hurt in her eyes as he brushed her aside, replayed in his mind. She had looked so hopeful, so proud of him. And what had he done? He had let his insecurities and fear of judgment drive a wedge between them. As he sat alone, away from the crowd, memories of his childhood began to flood his thoughts. He remembered the nights when his mother would come home late, exhausted from working multiple jobs, but still find the energy to help him with his homework. He remembered the times she went without new clothes or nice things so that he could have the supplies he needed for school. She had always been there for him, even when life was at its hardest. And today, the one day she wanted to be there for him in a public way, he had pushed her away. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had been so consumed with his desire to fit in, to be seen as successful and polished, that he had lost sight of what truly mattered. His mother's love and support were the very things that had gotten him to this point, and he had repaid her with rejection and shame. Guilt gnawed at him, growing stronger with each passing minute. He knew he had to make things right, but he wasn't sure how. Could she ever forgive him for what he had done? Could he forgive himself? As soon as the ceremony ended, Daniel didn't waste any time. He didn't join his friends for the celebratory drinks, didn't linger for more photos, and didn't wait for the faculty to congratulate him further. Instead, he bolted out of the auditorium, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked around frantically, scanning the crowd for any sign of his mother. She wasn't where he had last seen her. Panic set in as he realized she might have already left. He asked a few people if they had seen her, but no one seemed to remember the woman in the faded floral dress. Desperation clawed at him as he searched the campus grounds, but she was nowhere to be found. He could feel time slipping away, the chance to make things right slipping with it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he decided to head home, hoping she had gone back to their apartment. The entire bus ride felt interminable, his mind racing with thoughts of what he would say to her, how he could possibly explain his behavior. He rehearsed his apology over and over, knowing it would never be enough to undo the hurt he had caused. When he finally reached their apartment, Daniel hesitated at the door, his hand hovering over the doorknob. Taking a deep breath, he pushed it open and stepped inside. Mary was sitting at the small kitchen table, her head bowed as she mended her old dress, the very one she had worn to the graduation. The room was quiet, the only sound being the soft, rhythmic motion of her needle and thread. Daniel's heart broke at the sight of her. She looked so small, so fragile in that moment, and yet there was a quiet strength in the way she continued her task, even after everything that had happened. "Mom!" Daniel's voice cracked as he spoke, barely above a whisper. Mary looked up, her eyes red but calm. "Daniel, you're home. I'm so sorry," he said, the words tumbling out of him as he knelt beside her. "I'm so sorry for what I did today. I was ashamed, not of you, but of myself. I was afraid of what people would think, and I let that fear get in the way of what really matters. You've given me everything, and I treated you like you were nothing. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I had to tell you how sorry I am." Mary looked at her son, her expression softening as she listened to his heartfelt apology. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder, her touch warm and comforting. "Oh, Daniel," she said softly. "I was hurt, yes, but I understand. You've worked so hard to get to where you are, and I know you've felt pressure to fit in, to be accepted. But you have nothing to be ashamed of. Not of where you came from, and certainly not of me. I'm proud of you, no matter what, and that will never change." Daniel buried his face in his hands, overcome with emotion. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." Mary smiled faintly and lifted his chin so he could meet her eyes. "Forgiveness isn't something you earn, Daniel. It's something given out of love. And I love you always." Daniel felt a wave of relief wash over him as his mother's words sank in. The guilt and shame that had been eating away at him slowly began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of gratitude for the woman who had always been his greatest supporter. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Mary smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "You'll never have to find out, Daniel. I'll always be here, no matter where life takes you." They sat together in the quiet of their small kitchen, the weight of the day slowly lifting as they talked. Daniel opened up about his insecurities, his fear of being judged for his background, and the pressure he had felt to distance himself from anything that might mark him as different. Mary listened patiently, offering words of wisdom and reassurance. By the time their conversation ended, Daniel felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. He knew that he still had a lot to learn, but he also knew that he would never again let societal pressures come between him and his mother. That evening, they shared a simple dinner, just the two of them. It wasn't fancy or elaborate, but it was filled with love and understanding, a quiet celebration of the bond that had weathered yet another storm. In the weeks that followed, Daniel found himself reflecting on the events of that day. He realized that true success wasn't about how others perceived him, but about staying true to the people who had loved and supported him along the way. He began to embrace his background, no longer ashamed of where he came from, but proud of the journey he had taken to get to where he was. He also made a point of sharing his story with others, both in his personal and professional life. He spoke openly about the mistakes he had made, hoping that others could learn from his experience. In doing so, he found that he wasn't alone. Many people had struggled with similar feelings of insecurity and shame. At future milestones, Daniel made sure that his mother was front and center. When he received his first promotion, he took her out to dinner at a fancy restaurant, proudly introducing her to his colleagues as the woman who had made it all possible. And when he received an award for his outstanding work at the firm, he invited her to the ceremony and made sure everyone knew the sacrifices she had made to get him to where he was. In time, Daniel realized that his mother was his greatest treasure, far more valuable than any degree or job title. Her unconditional love, strength, and support had been the foundation of his success, and he vowed never to forget that again. As he looked ahead to the future, Daniel knew that life would bring new challenges and pressures, but he also knew that with his mother by his side, he could face anything. No longer ashamed of his roots, he stood tall, confident in who he was and where he came from. Together, they had weathered the storms of life, and together, they would continue to move forward, bound by a love that could never be broken.